It's wonderful to welcome John Aziz on this program. He is a musician, a peace activist, and an analyst. He is currently living in the United Kingdom, and he is of Palestinian descent. Today, we're discussing his new article, which was published on Quillette. It is titled "Death of a Deluded Man," and it is a tribute piece, so to speak, on Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. John, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
I'm really good. Thank you for having me. Obviously, this is a really important topic that I'm really excited to talk about because it's because of the kind of ramifications of the current war in Gaza and a future potential peace process between Israel and Palestine. And of course the history that has led us up to this point. So I'm very excited to talk to you about that.
Okay, yeah, so am I. I've discussed the topic of the war ever since October the 7th of last year. I've managed to invite like Jewish Israeli voices, Jewish American voices, and one time an Israeli Arab voices, but he requested that the episode that we have be taken offline or remain offline because he feared the ramifications of his speeches and statements regarding Israeli law. And so this is the first time I have someone of Palestinian descent to join us. Um, so I was first introduced to you when you appeared on Zoe Boots's podcast, I believe,
Yes,
Etc. And yeah,
etc.
and I find you to be very much a necessary voice for this current discourse. So, with that long-winded intro in mind, let's begin with my first question, which is, what are your thoughts on October the 7th, 2023, now that we are 1 year and a few days removed from it?
Well, it was a series of horrendous atrocities. There may well be in international law a right to resist under occupation, but that right has to be exercised in a coherent way, in an effective way, and in a way that doesn't amount to committing atrocities against civilians. And I think ultimately, I think that's what October the 7th will be remembered as. As a Palestinian myself, I would say that the most important thing to remember about it is that it didn't actually do anything to advance the interests of Palestinians. What it actually ended up doing is starting a really horrific war that destroyed more than half of the buildings in Gaza, has killed more than 40,000 people, and has led to the total economic and infrastructural degradation of Gaza. That's not what we need. What we actually need in Gaza is building up Gaza, creating infrastructure, creating housing, creating businesses, creating connections with other countries, including with Israel, who's our neighbor and is always going to be our neighbor, for the foreseeable future. And I think that October the 7th was ultimately a complete disaster for Palestinians. So obviously, it was a tremendous and horrific disaster for Israelis as well. And Israelis are, of course, still held in Gaza today. We can't forget the hostages that are still held in Gaza today, and that is the basis for which the war started. Hamas decided they wanted to take hostages, and Israel decided they wanted to get those hostages back. And that's where we are. So my message to Hamas is it's time to release the hostages. It was time on October the 8th last year to release the hostages. It's time to release the hostages, have a ceasefire, make peace. Hamas should leave Gaza, and there should be responsible Palestinian leadership that prioritizes the interests of Palestinians rather than prioritizing ideological jihad.
Yes, that's a wonderful answer. I'm generally a supporter of Israel. I support their right to exist, to defend itself, to provide its citizens with basic needs, etc., etc. Nevertheless, that does not exclude my utmost sympathy for the plight of the Palestinians who are, well, currently amongst the most commonly known stateless people in the world. There are others too, like the
Of
Kurds and
course.
the Uyghurs. So it's a very pressing human rights and human dignity concern. Now, nevertheless, I don't believe that the current so-called pro-Palestinian wave that was sparked after October the 7th of last year solved anything. So, as someone who is living in the Western world right now, why are Westerners pro-Palestine?
That's an interesting question. I would say that a lot of people in the West are not pro-Palestine. I would say a lot of people, if you have to place everyone on a spectrum of pro-Palestine to pro-Israel, which itself is a bit of an oversimplification, but if you have to do that, I would say there's a lot of people in the West who are pro-Israel. I would say that the pro-Palestine end of the spectrum is mostly, I would say that a lot of it is about empathy for a group of people who have had, a really tough time. As you know, we can discuss the various mistakes that Palestinian political leaders have made, and I don't deny that there have been a lot of missed opportunities. But aside from that, Palestinians have had a really tough time. I've been to the West Bank. My family's in the West Bank. Going through military checkpoints is it's a horrible experience if you're on the end of the people who are being suspected of being terrorists. So I don't want that to happen. I think a lot of people in the West don't want that to happen. Unfortunately, there is also and multiple phenomena here at play beyond this. That there is also this kind of resurgent anti-Semitism that is simply about not necessarily opposing Israeli policy, but simply opposing Israel because it's Jewish. That is a factor that we have to consider. And there are also other groups like, for example, Marxist Leninists who have an axe to grind, who don't necessarily care about the Palestinians at all, but who are trying to use Palestinians as a way to push their kind of ideological agenda, whether that's, against capitalism, whether it's against what they would see as Western imperialism and Western foreign policy. So there's multiple different factors going on here. I would caveat that I believe most pro-Palestine protesters do have good intentions and don't hate Israel and do just want the best for Palestinians. But there's an awful lot of other stuff going on as well.
Yes, I understand. And this is something that I read also in, the history of the Middle East, that there's a misconception in pro-Israeli people in the West that the Arab world has a blanket support of the Palestinian people and their cause. Well, that's not the case because at present, Gaza, which shares a border with Egypt, well, the government of Egypt is erecting a wall that is to prevent Gazan refugees from crossing over the border. And the Egyptian government itself has stated that it won't admit um, or integrate Gazan refugees. And there is a tendency that when the Palestinian cause fits certain agendas of Arab countries, then they would pledge their support for it. If not, then not. And of course, we can talk about how the PLO invaded Lebanon and such. But at present, are the Arab countries generally pro-Palestinian, or is it just a political
Well, it's
football?
it's 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 complex. I would say that the Arab street is largely trying to be pro-Palestinian in at least in the sense that they would certainly consider Palestinians to be victims of various things. They would certainly see it as kind of victims of Western imperialism and victims of Israeli settler colonialism. But Arab countries are not necessarily the same as the Arab street, and I think it is quite illuminating to consider that Jordan and Egypt had what we would consider to be the 1967 borders of the West Bank and Gaza under their control between 1948 and 1967. They didn't create a Palestinian state, right? They didn't create housing for all of the refugees who had been displaced during the 1948 war. They could have returned to all of them, or rather than going to Lebanon and Jordan and various other places. They could have all gone to the West Bank and Gaza. That would have been rehousing the Palestinian refugees. It could have solved a large part of the refugee problem. Certainly not all of it, but a large part of it. But the fact is that they didn't do that, and ultimately the Palestinian issue is playing second fiddle and third fiddle to other issues that they have, and oftentimes with Arab countries, it's actually the strength of the government itself that is their main concern. They want to still be the government because a lot of these countries are for the most part not democracies. They're authoritarian regimes or monarchies, so that their main concern is staying in power in a lot of cases. I would say today that some countries which are either authoritarian regimes or monarchies are genuinely trying to make things better for Palestinians. I would say that the UAE does have a genuine interest in reaching a resolution to the crisis. They've normalized relations with Israel, of course, and they're also providing a lot of aid to Palestinians in Gaza today. I would also say that the Saudi Arabians have a genuine interest in wanting to end the kind of negative situation that Palestinians are in and wanting to resolve the situation. And they too have an interest in normalizing relations with Israel. So I am hopeful that alongside countries like Jordan and Egypt that today have relationships with Israel and which are relatively stable compared to somewhere like Lebanon or somewhere like Yemen under the Houthis. I would say that there are interests in the region certainly that would say that yes, there needs to be a resolution. It needs to be a peaceful resolution, and it needs to recognize and accept Israel and live alongside Israel. Because of course, that's what Jordan and Egypt have accepted.
Yes, and I suppose you can make the case to certain Arab leaders that well, normalizing relations with Israel isn't merely just the right thing to do. It serves your own self-interest because well, Israel is a rich country. Why don't you want to trade with it or establish diplomatic ties with it? So, do you believe that um, normalizing relations with Israel may lead to, if not a democratic country in whichever country that chooses to do so in the Arab world, but just a little bit more open of a society there may be?
Yeah, I mean, my mantra that I keep saying on every podcast that I go on to is Israel isn't going anywhere, right? Israel isn't going anywhere. Neither are Palestinians. So realistically, Arab countries in the Arab world, they should be looking at Israel as a steady fixture of the Middle East, and they should understand that Israel is a country that you can trade with. Israel is a country you can have diplomatic relations with. I would hasten to caution that probably the country for whom it was most urgent for Israel to normalize with and have relations with was Palestine, because Israel and Palestine are the two countries that have, I suppose, the hottest version of conflict. Yes, Israel also has some level of conflict with Lebanon. Yes, with the Houthis as well. Yes, with the Islamic Republic of Iran. But it's if we solve Israel and Palestine, that's going to open up the Middle East to a lot of changes and a lot of normalization for Israel. Because I think the region is starting to understand what I just said, that Israel isn't actually going anywhere. Israel is here to stay. And furthermore, people, other minority groups within the region, like the Kurds, like the Yazidi, for example, they're not going to be cleansed or kicked out of the region, right? They're part of the region as well. So I think the more countries that recognize this, recognize the rights of minority groups, including Jews, including Kurds, including Yazidi, including Middle Eastern Christians, for example, like the Maronites in Lebanon, the more um that we recognize that these are steady fixtures that are not going to go anywhere, and that we have to live together in the Middle East, and we have to live normally. It's no life living in war and terrorism and military occupation. This isn't a good life. We need a normal life. We need economic development. And of course, there are Middle Eastern countries that are very, very good at that, and they're the ones that I was talking about previously, such as the UAE, such as Saudi Arabia. So absolutely normalize relations with Israel and build lots of infrastructure. Build um, the infrastructure for people in the region to have a normal life.
Right. Yeah, I've always believed that you cannot understand the Middle East without understanding religion. And of course, people, I think from the Western world, may have this image of just a dozen or so Arab Muslim countries with one Jewish outsider, which is very tiny. But in fact, multiple religions exist within that area of the Near East. Yeah, you certainly have Christianity, as you've mentioned, but also certain faiths like the Druze and the Baha'is, and so on and so on, which it's very interesting to know, but of course it's not that well known outside of, I guess, the scholarly circle.
I mean, there's a lot of other minorities, even beyond, the Druze and the Baha'i, right? I was talking to a linguistic scholar a few weeks ago about the Rom people who are connected to the European gypsies. The world, but the pre-modern world had lots and lots of different ethnic groups in it, and lots of different people groups in it, and it's incredibly important that we're respectful to all of them. The Middle East isn't just for Muslims. The Middle East is for all the people of the Middle East. The Middle East isn't just for any one group.
Okay, now on to the subject that we have at hand. So when I hear about the death of Sinwar, part of me was glad because one less terrorist on the earth, but a part of me is also filled with dread because there's a high chance that within Gazan or Palestinian society as a whole, he may be considered a hero. And to push it further, maybe some mothers will name their children after him, and maybe some younger Palestinian or Gazan extremists will grow up emulating him, given the status quo, the situation that's at hand. So I wonder, so with a historical lens equipped, how do you think that Palestinian history will remember this man, Sinwar?
I think a lot of that depends upon what replaces Hamas in Gaza after the war. Because if you have a regime there that is, lionizing Hamas and is saying that Hamas, did some wonderful thing on October the 7th, then of course they're going to lionize Sinwar, and Sinwar is going to become a hero. If what replaces Hamas is not that, if it is maybe something based upon Palestinian moderates, perhaps, then people with my views are not going to lionize Sinwar. We don't think Sinwar is um at all beneficial to the people of Palestine. Sinwar was killing Palestinians before he started killing Jews, right? His reputation as the butcher of Khan Yunis was based upon him killing people he accused of being collaborators with Israel, Palestinians. And whether or not any of these people were collaborators with Israel, who knows, right? I'm not part of the Israeli government. I don't have any relationship with the Israeli government. I'm not a collaborator with Israel. I just have heterodox, unorthodox views. But there are idiots who will claim that I'm somehow a collaborator with Israel. But just because I want to say, I say, okay, let's have a two-state solution. Let's have peace with Israel. So that kind of epithet of being a collaborator gets thrown at people who have nothing whatsoever to do with that. And that's what Sinwar was doing. I think it's incredibly important that we recognize that what comes after Gaza, what comes after Hamas, has to be a positive force for Gazan people. And ultimately, the decision on what comes after Hamas is not just for the Palestinian people. It's also going to involve Israel, because Israel is effectively is conquering Gaza right now. And it's also going to involve the regional powers, such as countries with a relationship with Israel, like the countries in the Abraham Accords. So and also, I guess, suppose the wider international community. So together we have to look at this and we have to say, do we want to be in this situation again in 20 years or 30 years where there's another Yahya Sinwar and he's engaging in jihad against Israel, and there's going to be another October the 7th, and then there's going to be another war. I think collectively, as Palestinians, as Arabs, as Jews, as Europeans, as Americans, as human beings, we need to say this can't happen again. This was a disaster. October the 7th was a disaster. The war in Gaza was a disaster. And we have to make a choice that this can't happen again, and that means that we need something different than Hamas. We need something different than Sinwar, and the people who want to lionize him, they can get lost.
Yeah, yeah. I know that the Hamas government, if you can call it a government, was elected, if you can call it elected, in 2006.
Sort of, yeah. There, there were elections. They were a long time ago. We haven't had any elections since then. Whether I would have allowed, what is effectively an extremist terrorist group to run in elections, I wouldn't have done that. By the way, I believe it was George W. Bush who insisted that that Hamas be allowed as an option. I don't think that Hamas should have been an option. I think it's dishonest to say that Hamas is a legitimate political party.
Yes. So I mentioned this because as of this recording, it's been some 18 years since Hamas was elected and never stopped being the controlling power of Gaza. And as you've mentioned, Hamas is just not just a danger to Israel and the Jews, is also a danger to Palestinians who do anything that is against them, whether they are Palestinian opposing groups like the PA or um, women or gay people or any sort of Muslim believers who divert from their fundamentalist extremist teachings. Now, my question is, well, why do why do Gazans, I guess, choose to either follow them, to be a member of Hamas, and if they're not members, supporters of them?
I think if we go back to the time when Hamas did win that election, they didn't actually get more than 50% of the vote, and I believe they got less votes in Gaza than they did in the West Bank, even at the time. But I if we go back to that, their promises were about change and reform. That was their slogan: reform and change and reform. And a lot of people were very frustrated with the Palestinian Authority because they thought the Palestinian Authority was corrupt. There was a lot of nepotism going on. There were people siphoning wealth that should have been going to building the Palestinian economy, and instead it was going into, corruption, and it would go, it went to Qatar, it went to Paris. Is one place associated with the Palestinian Authority and Yasser Arafat's widow. But I think there was a lot of frustration with the Palestinian Authority and with the PLO, and I think that is something Hamas took advantage of. I do also think there's a strong Islamist current of ideology in Palestinian society and in the wider Middle East. We can't deny that. Hamas, of course, is an offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which is an Islamist organization which wants to return governance from a secular framework based upon, Western ideas of secularism. They want to return to an Islamist framework and ultimately to the idea of a caliphate. Um, I think that that is attractive to Muslims in the Middle East in the same sense that maybe Donald Trump saying "Make America Great Again" is attractive to Americans, right? So, because there's this idealistic idea of the past glory and a greatness that was there. And sort of, I think a lot of the Islamism, it's sort of a make Arabia great again is a interesting shorthand for kind of what attracts Arabs and Muslims towards those ideas. Um, I think though that ultimately we can see empirically that where Islamists take over, those countries don't really tend to thrive. They seem to create a lot of conflict in those countries, and I think the Islamist playbook is when the conflict arises, what they do, of course, is they blame Israel, they blame the Jews, they blame America, they blame everyone but themselves. But whatever they may say about why things don't work out when Islamists get into power, I think that it actually, above and beyond anything else, it reflects on them. It is their policies and it is their ideas that are being tested whenever they get into power. And I think ultimately, the reality is that these are not effective rulers. I don't think that basing your government and your government policies in the year 2024 on a religious book that was, written in the 7th century, that was supposedly revealed by revelation from, um, some supernatural force to a guy called Muhammad. I don't think that's whatever that is, and I respect religion. I'm very respectful towards religion, but whatever that is, that's a religious idea and not a way to govern your country in 2024. So I think that Hamas have very little to offer to the Palestinian people. I think that Palestinians who want to follow that path, like look at Gaza today. Look at Gaza today. More than half of the people in Gaza are living in tents, right? That's what the path of jihad against Israel has led Palestinians to. That's the reality.
Yeah. And yeah, to your point about government being built by a supposed holy book, I think an example can be said about, say, the state of Utah before it was incorporated into the Union, when it was overrun by, Mormon followers. So Brigham Young to be as an example, and he basically run it as his personal fiefdom and basically a theocracy. So just to mention that. Now,
I admit I don't I that's not my specialty. I visited Utah once. I visited there once, but I don't know that much about their history. But that's a really interesting parallel.
yeah, yes, it is. Yeah, Mormon history is just a very interesting subfield to sink your teeth into. So, you titled, or at least Quillette, perhaps, titled the article "Death of a Deluded Man." Um, Nowadays, I think after Oslo, I think it's been 30 or so years since that accord was signed. We who believe that there needs to be such a thing as a Palestinian state, I think will likely be branded as deluded by pro-Israeli Westerners, which a position I find to be quite regrettable. I'm still committed to that uh, that effort. So I'd like to hear from you. So, is statehood the best option for the interests of the Palestinians as well as the Israelis?
What I tend to say to this sort of question these days, I would preface this by saying that yes, basically I am a two-state solution supporter still after even after all the failure, and there's been a lot of failure on both sides. But what I do tend to say is that ultimately the solution that we need is a solution that can be agreed. It needs to be something that the negotiators can agree to, and of course the Palestinian negotiators are going to want self-determination. There's no doubt about that. Whether it's whichever party, and leaving Hamas out of the equation because they're a little bit different, but whichever party, whether it's Fatah or another party that wants to negotiate for peace, whoever is sent, they're going to advocate for Palestinian self-determination. And of course, Israel is going to be Israel. It's still going to be a Jewish state, and it's still going to be a state that it exists not only for the Jews in Israel, but also for the Jewish diaspora, right? But I think ultimately we have to sit down and we have to talk and we have to agree. The process of resolving this is about both sides, and it's about both sides being able to listen to each other. It's about both sides being able to talk to each other, and it's about both sides being able to aim for reconciliation. And I think we can't have any pre-conclusions about what that's going to mean. I mean, as I said myself, I am a supporter of two states. That is to me, that's what makes most sense. Just simply because I understand that Israelis want to be Israel. They don't want to become Palestine. I understand that Palestinians don't want to become Israel either. There's a difference in what in the national narrative. That's the key thing. Israel and Palestine are two different national narratives. They're two different national narratives that kind of apply to the same geographical area, and that's a huge factor that's caused a large part of the conflict. There's this big disagreement between Palestinian nationalists and Zionists on how we should move forward. What kind of country that there should have been after the British mandate ended. And I think we just have to be honest with each other from now on, right? I don't think Israelis want to become Palestine. I don't think Palestinians want to become Israel. I think we have to be honest with each other. I think we have to sit down. We have to negotiate. And I would tend to say that the most logical solution will be two states. It will be something like the 1967 borders with some land swaps. Palestine probably won't have an army for a very long time. Ultimately, Palestine may have an army, but the rule will probably be that it can't be used against Israel. And I think that's reasonable because we don't want to restart the fighting. Or and we kind of we kind of have to take it from there. But I'm not going to prejudge what could or could not happen. It's all about trying to find something, trying to find a compromise that's going to be amenable to both groups of people.
Yes. So you mentioned the Islamic claim of the caliphate, and that's why they still covet the land that is now the state of Israel. But in contrast, the Israelis also have a religious claim to the vast swaths of land of ancient Israel that
Yeah.
includes, if not Gaza, then the West Bank. They're, they call it Judea and Samaria, which they base it off of the Bible, of course. And so, how can we, negotiating on a secular framework, address these religious concerns?
It's quite difficult, isn't it? I appreciate your question. I think that it is quite difficult for we secularists to even engage with people who have completely different frameworks for understanding the world than we do, right? I think if you're a kind of Zionist ultra nationalist who believes that it is ordained by God that all the land between the Nile and the Euphrates belongs to Israel, and like that's just a completely different framework to understand the world. Because I'm a secularist. I believe in the world as it is. I certainly believe that Palestinians and Israelis are both valid. They both have a claim to be there. But there are some people who have these divinely inspired claims, and sometimes they make up the government. In fact, Hamas believes that the land is Dar al-Islam, which would be Islamic land, right? Large swaths of Netanyahu's government, whether it's Ben Gvir, whether it's Smotrich, whether it's people in Likud, believe that all of that land is divinely ordained as Eretz Israel. So what do you do? It's a difficult question, and I think secularists we have to stick to our beliefs. We have to stick to what we believe is right, and we have to try and engage with these people as honestly as possible because their frameworks for seeing the world are not the same as ours. But ultimately, reality is all of the stuff that doesn't go away when you stop believing in it, and Israel doesn't go away if I stop believing in it. And Palestinians don't go away if Israelis stop believing in it. So we kind of have to have a reality based framework for this. And I think ultimately, while there are really serious challenges that this question kind of alludes to, um, if we want to solve it, we have to kind of proceed. But I get it. It's kind of head scratching because really, if on one end you have people whose position is all the land belongs to us because God said so, on the other hand you have people saying all the land belongs to us because God said so. How do you compromise between that? That's a difficult question, isn't it?
Yes, yes, tremendously so. And just to move just to move along with this topic of religious disputes, right now a an even smaller patch of land is also being under dispute under religious concerns, and that is the land of the Temple Mount. I understand that there's also a Western Wall too, which Jewish people believe that that is the last remaining fragment of their temple, which was destroyed, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the holy sites of Islam. And I believe that once the Jews enter Temple Mount, they are forbidden from praying there. And it is such a absurd reality if you're Jewish, because that is arguably the one of the holiest sites, if not the holiest sites of your religion. So for for this particular patch of land and perhaps the entire city of Jerusalem in general, which so far three Abrahamic faiths have claim over it. How do you resolve between these claims?
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult question. I would say that there are disagreements among Jewish people about the Temple Mount simply because like as I understand it, some Jewish people believe that Jews shouldn't go up there because there's the risk of going into what they call the Holy of Holies, which would be where the Ark of the Covenant was. And I think that would be somehow sacrilegious. Now, possibly I've misunderstood that. I'm not Jewish, but from my reading around this topic, there is disagreement about that, about whether or not Jewish people should be allowed to go up there and pray. And um, it's a difficult status quo, isn't it? Because I think large parts of the Muslim world would become incredibly incensed if the status quo changes. Ben Gavir, who is a little bit of a pyromaniac, seems quite intent on um, trying to rile up parts of the Muslim world by saying we're going to change the status quo. Um, for me, kind of on a historical and archaeological level, it's very clear that that is the Temple Mount. Um, it's also clear that there are some mosques there. Those mosques were built after a long period of non-Islamic occupation. Obviously the Romans were the first to kick the Jews out of control of Jerusalem. I would say that I can't prejudge what's going to happen to it. I think we have to be respectful to the mosques. I don't think that the mosques can go. I think there might be a clever way of building a new Jewish temple without disturbing the mosques, for example. I don't know. Maybe they incorporate that into the location somehow. I think demolishing historic mosques would be a real shame. I think it's a very risky. At the same time, I think it obviously is a Jewish holy site, so you have to sort of balance things. And I think maybe one of the possible solutions is finding some land within that area that isn't being used or is being used for non-religious purposes and then building a temple there. I don't know. And I'm certainly not going to be in the game of telling Jews how to practice their religion or telling Muslims how to practice their religion either. Uh, but I hope there's a compromise that we can make with not only Jerusalem itself, but with the Temple Mount. But this is very difficult stuff, and I think probably in any kind of peace negotiation, we would have to bring in religious authorities from both the Muslim and the Jewish side, and they would have to be a big part of the negotiation, specifically over the Temple Mount and what could be plausible there that we could agree to, um, what we could agree to do to have coexistence.
Yes. I read that in Jerusalem there's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which actually as a Christian and a Catholic I would like to visit at some point as a pilgrimage site. And within that church, because it was built on the tomb of our Lord Jesus, so it is an incredibly holy site. And within that church complex, there's a small ladder that's been set there in place for since the 19th century. So it's been set there unmoved. This is because I believe at least six church denominations, including the Catholic Church, share custody over it. And
Shared
any attempt
custodianship.
by one church or one person even to move or to alter any detail from that church would result in sort of an ecumenical war. So it can be absurd that way, but it is what it is. Yeah.
But that sort of compromise might end up having to be what happens with the Temple Mount, that we kind of just have to be extremely careful about making making changes that would hurt the other party, because I don't want Muslims to be religiously hurt. I don't want Jews to be religiously hurt either. But we have to just kind of figure it out as it goes along.
Mhm. Yes. Um, I know that you've implied this answer for this question, given that you've mentioned one Minister of Defense, Itamar Ben-Gvir, but are you worried at all about the anti-Palestinian amongst Israeli Jewish in the likes of Baruch Goldstein back in the day, resurging once again.
I mean, I think to some extent that's happened since October the 7th. There has been a lot of kind of rhetoric around revenge. Some people would interpret some of the things that have happened in Gaza as revenge. Um, I I think anti-Palestinian bigotry is incredibly unfair because although I understand there's been lots and lots of transgressions against Israel and against Jewish people, I very strongly believe two wrongs don't make a right. And when I say to Palestinians that we shouldn't hate Jews, we should try and get along with Jews and try and live together with Jews and try and coexist with Jews. Ultimately, I have to say the same thing to the other side as well. That um, I don't think hatred's the answer. I don't think either side's going anywhere, and I think that the kind of more Kahanist or Baruch Goldstein-esque um, forces on the other side, I think they are growing in strength, and I think as Israel becomes more geopolitically isolated and more criticized by forces around the world, I think that there is a sense that that kind of isolation could result in more kind of like radicalization. So I would tend to say that the answer to radicalization is de-radicalization, and I think people on both sides who are becoming radicalized, who are becoming extreme in their views, we have to talk to each other. We have to talk to each other, and we have to air our grievances in a legitimate way and try and figure out a solution. Try and figure out a solution that hurts both of us as little as possible. So the moderate people who want to stop that have to work together. Moderate Palestinians and moderate Israelis have to work together to find a pathway forward.
So, on a note of humor, I'm sure you know the show Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's an episode where Larry David finds a Palestinian chicken place uh, around his neighborhood, and well, he really liked the chicken, but because he's a Jewish, he had to sort of like go in there in secret because he didn't want to betray his race and whatnot. And then he found himself being very attracted to the woman who was the owner there, and it sparks sort of like a rebellion between the Jewish community in LA and the Palestinian community there, and Larry David has to choose between good chicken and presumably good intercourse with this woman and well, his own race, and that's just a really funny setup to
We are
depend
we we are
going on.
cousins. I mean literally Palestinians and Israelis are cousins. We have a lot in common. We have a lot in common, and we always end up finding each other in similar places. So, you know, I don't know specifically what the writers of that episode had in mind, but I imagine maybe they are talking from their own experiences of I'm not sure if the writers were Jewish. I guess I can assume they probably were, but Jewish people and Palestinians meet each other, and we do find that we have a lot of stuff in common. And sometimes we fight, sometimes there's problems, sometimes there's disagreements. But we will always come back to finding each other, and they're not going to disappear, and neither are we. So we have to, we have to take advantage of the things that we have in common to get along with each other. I hope, and whether that is good chicken or good intercourse, who knows?
I guess I can answer that question for you because Curb Your Enthusiasm is an improvised show.
Right,
Technically, there's no writer. Larry
right,
David
okay,
comes
okay.
up with an outline, and the actors, including himself, wing it from there.
Improvised. So it's Larry David.
Yeah. Um.
I
Finally,
didn't I didn't know
yeah,
that actually.
yeah. Yeah. It blew my mind when I found out about it too. So finally, I'd like to ask you this. What are some of the aspects of Palestinian culture and history and peoplehood that is not regularly talked about in not just Western media, but Israeli media too?
I can't speak too much to Israeli media simply because I don't speak Hebrew and I've never lived in Israel. So I can't say what is specifically underrepresented because I haven't really watched that much, but maybe I have some kind of idea. I I think that often it's the most simple things in life that get ignored when we're looking at these big, grandiose political conflicts, right? Just the simple humanity of our enemies so can sometimes get forgotten. It can sometimes get swept under the rug. You know, as we were just suggesting, we're just human beings, and we're just normal people for the most part who are caught in a really absurd and crazy situation. And yeah, some of us are radicalized, some of us believe extreme things, some of us have extreme ambitions, but ultimately a large number of us are just the vast majority of us are just normal people, and that's probably why that's why I hold out in hope for peace, that ultimately it will be more important to get a new washing machine, to get good housing, to get the latest iPhone, to get trains that run on time, to be able to travel, to be able to go on holiday, to be able to um trade with other businesses outside the country. I think those things are going to be a lot more valuable to Palestinians in the long run than jihad, than destroying Israel. So I hope that Israelis can keep us in mind, as a large number of us are just like you. Really, we're just people, and we eat the same food as you, and we sleep on the same schedule as you, and we have dreams just like you, and we have ambitions just like you. And ultimately, I think that the moderate elements in both of our societies can win. That's I firmly believe in this. Otherwise, I wouldn't spend all of my time advocating for peace if I didn't believe that it was possible for people to um find a way to come together and find a way to overcome this schism between that we've had. And yes, there's a lot of bad stuff that's gone on, and a lot of people have died, and we're all, I think Israelis and Palestinians are both very traumatized, whether it's a bomb being dropped on a refugee camp, whether it's a pizza joint in Tel Aviv, or a nightclub getting blown up by a terrorist. I think we're both sides are extremely traumatized, right? So ultimately, I think the moderate people can win, and I think our humanity will connect us more than divide us. I hope.
And I certainly envision, a future hypothetical scenario where Palestinians and Israelis negotiate, and somehow Palestinian chicken will play a role in establishing peace. So I certainly hope for that to happen.
We have some great chicken dishes. That's that's
Mhm.
that's what we're I think my favorite's maklube, which is something my dad, my stepmom used to cook for me. But there's a lot of great chicken dishes in Palestinian cuisine. And I live in the UK right now, and I would say overall the the food culture here is very, very, very weak compared to Palestinian food culture.
Oh
Palestinian
yeah.
food culture is amazing. Palestinian food culture is one of the best in the world. And British food has its ups and downs, right? It's not as bad as maybe some people on the internet would claim it is, but at the same time, it is quite bad. It's
It is.
like
Quite bad.
a lot of people here don't really season our food, right?
Well,
Sometimes you'll go to a restaurant, and the food they serve you will not have been, they didn't put any salt or pepper or anything.
wow, okay.
It can be quite bad here, but Palestinian food is great.
Mhm. Okay. On that note, thank you very much, John Aziz, for joining the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.